It's not even really working.
Ah, sí.
When I
Again?
actually had like, I think when I was in France, if we can make it
Okay.
Maybe
like,
hay que ponerla al comienzo.
do the maths.
Yes.
Ponerla en el 1.
Yeah, so my grandma used to think that's that it was just like crunchy, and we eat it separately. The massage with like something else. Yeah.
I imagine that's like grandma South American food. Grandma food, if anything, is always the best. Like,
Yeah.
grandma South American food.
It was really good.
It's like grandmother, like Italian food is always the best.
Okay, we're starting the broadcast. Good afternoon. I'm Alberto Diaz-Calleros, Director of the Center for Latin American Studies here at Stanford. We're here for the Friday lecture on education, the broken promise, efforts, fears, and hopes of Chilean families in the educational market with Professor Cristian Belay and Marcela Ramos. I do want to note that this is being live streamed in our YouTube page, so please kindly know that if you have any questions, you can use the chat function there. I will make sure I convey those to our speakers, and the recording of this will be also available for future viewing in our YouTube page. For those of us who are here at Stanford, I want us to remind ourselves that we are in the land and the territory of the Ohlone original peoples. Before I express our gratitude to the Ohlone peoples, I want to say that the power of a few individuals can often make an enormous difference in the way we conceive and think of and see the presence of indigenous peoples who never disappeared, never went away. They're still in our midst. This weekend, Stanford celebrates its powwow. It's one of the most important powwow meetings in the Western United States. And it really started from a couple of students, Native American students, who wanted to leave a mark, to put this as a presence in the campus. And we're so proud of the kind of difference that a few individuals can make in making indigenous peoples visible. So if any of you who have a chance, it's a great opportunity to learn more and understand more about the reality of the Native Americans who are still amongst us. So we offer our gratitude to the land, to the water, and to the air that surround us, and pay our respects to the past, to the present, and the future of the Ohlone peoples who continue to be present both in their homelands and throughout their diasporas. Cristian Belay, he's an associate professor at the Center for Advanced Research on Education at the University of Chile. He was our Tinker visiting professor here at Stanford at the class. He's a sociologist from the University of Chile with a master's in education policy and a PhD from Harvard University. He has published extensively on Chilean education, mainly regarding education policy, school change and improvement, school segregation, privatization, and school choice. He has several books, but his latest is The High School in Turbulent Times, How Has Chilean Secondary Education Changed? And now the one we're going to be listening about, Education, the Broken Promise, just published in 2022. Marcela Ramos is an interdisciplinary research fellow at the School of Education in the University of Glasgow in the UK. Before joining the University of Glasgow, she was a senior associate teacher at the School of Education of the University of Bristol. She holds a PhD in education from the University of Bristol and master's in public policy from the School of Economics of Universidad de Chile, and she is also a journalist. Her research interests are in the intersection of education, sustainable futures, and political economy. And in Chile, she has done quite substantive research on the marketization of education. And she's particularly interested in questions of parental subjectivities, that we will learn a little bit about them, values, practices, and beliefs regarding education among the middle and upper class parents that are navigating the school system, often characterized by these selective practices, by privatization and by segregation we will learn about today. So Cristian and Marcela, thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you again for the presentation, and thank you everyone for coming to this session. Before starting and starting to reviewing the contents of this book, let's start with a conversation about our school times. So, to introduce the topic of this book, I have a question. And do you know if and how your parents choose the school you attend? If anyone wants to share their experience, when you think about your school choice, your parental school choice has to do with the location, the proximity, has to do with a particular characteristic of the school. I don't know if anyone wants to share like a few minutes of experiences.
So I grew up in El Paso, Texas, but my house actually sits on the New Mexico-Texas border, and so legally I was supposed to go to school in New Mexico, but the education system there is ranked number 49 in the country, and so my parents chose, rather than having to drive very far into like a rural area and go to school in New Mexico, to go to a private school in El Paso, which was like not the ideal. I think I would have rather gone to like a public school in Texas, but that was kind of the decision-making process.
Like about proximity in a way, and the easiest way to get access to the school. Thank you.
I think my parents based it off of ratio of students to teacher. So a smaller school where maybe 10 students to a teacher.
I see. So let me share my own experience in Chile. When my parents has to choose a school, basically they were looking for a school that has English as a second language, for instance. So one characteristic was the language of the school, another the location again. So it was proximity and this particular characteristic of language.
Well, I think my parents didn't think about the school choice. They just sent me the school nearest to the home. Everybody was going there.
Okay.
No school choice at all.
So the thing is that we have different experiences, and we have like proximity, we have about thinking about the type of school. But let me introduce you to a layer of complexity. What if we think about education, and what if we think about education as a market, maybe? And if we think as parents, as kind of perfect consumers of education, who will choose the school, like looking for certain characteristics. I mean, in the market, we have a supply side, we have a demand side, and we have information. So if we think as parents, looking for like buying goods, okay, I want to choose this and that based on certain characteristics. We will look for information, price. So to some extent, the Chilean education system was informed by the kind of market logic. In a market, let's simplify the definitions because we have economists here, but let's simplify the definitions. We have basically in this market two areas, the supply and demand side. The supply side, the schools, the family side, the demand side. We have this market. In the demand side, we have families that are expected to choose a school with no geographical restrictions. It's up to them as long as they want to. The state provided vouchers, so families have a kind of money in a way to where they choose, they put their money on the school they choose. Also for them to be informed, in a way to provide information to their decision, the schools, the system have a national test, so they get access to school rankings. They also receive the results, so they got information, plenty of information about, let's say, the quality of the schools attached to this school ranking. On the supply side, we have schools that compete as the market. When we want to buy something, and then there's different providers. So these schools are expected to compete for familiar preferences. And as providers, they differentiate. For instance, some religious school or English as a second language. So they have characteristics that allow them to differentiate. Some of the schools also receive the voucher as a payment, but also charge another fee. So you have in Chile the private subsidized schools, which were fund like a voucher plus this fee. And also, a school starts to select among the practices and the practices of the school within this market logic. Some schools start to apply selection procedures to students, and they have the power to select and also expel from the school. So now the market is kind of more complicated. It's not just information. We have a school choice on the side of the families, but also on the school side. So it's not just the family that select the school, but also schools select families. So we have this market a little bit complicated. We have a reciprocal, mutual process of choice. And this book, if we think about also academic research in Chile about this market school system, we will find huge amount of literature regarding how schools the strategies schools and the how a school in a way behave in this school system, in this part of the school system. We have information, we have research around the schools. This book tries to get into the black box of the families, the subjective experiences after 40 years of this market model. We want to understand, we want to explore the subjective experiences of families within this Chilean market model. We want to get into this, let's say, the demand side of the market, the subjectivities of the model. Let me tell you a little bit about the book. So this book is the result from a series of investigations carried out since 2013 in Chile. Basically, a team of researchers based at the University of Chile. What are the characteristics of the research that inform this book from a conceptual perspective? Basically, a sociological approach to parental choice, and also a sociological approach and reading of parental involvement, parents' relationship with their children's education. We look at parents, we look at different social class parents, so we apply the logic of the sociological lens through social class. We also want to bring in the experience of a school choice within a particular context, Chile, the neoliberal laboratory, the neoliberal laboratory in Latin America, after 40 years of this application, so the consistent application of this system. We want to bring in this case to the literature. In terms of the methods, we conduct interviews and focus group, almost 200 participants, mostly urban, Santiago and other main cities in Chile. And after the analysis, we identify basically broadly 4 main things that you can see here. A school's power, what does it mean to be a good parent, different broad things. Today, we are going to share this intimate conversation around education. We talk about the sobremesa, in Spanish. That moment where you start to share your experience, reflections, aspirations about the future, about the fears. So this book will present this conversation, and today we will basically, within these broad topics, we will basically talk about 4 main things, or areas, things. We will talk about quality of education, what does it mean for parents, how they understand, how the meanings they assign to quality. We will talk about pay. What does it mean to pay for the students' education? We will talk about selection procedures, and we will talk about the social context of the school, the characteristics of the schools, and how parents navigate through these 4 main areas of conversation. So,
yeah, and if you read the idea of market-oriented educational reforms, here in the USA and in Chile was also adopted this idea. The idea of quality is central to the dynamic they wanted to create. They were expected that the schools will compete based on quality, improving quality, will compete because they think that parents will choose schools based on quality. So parents will search for the best schools, for the better schools, the best schools, expecting the best school for their children. So because of that, and because schools are compelled to compete, because the funding will be based on the parents' preferences, the voucher, that's the key idea of the voucher. So you will create a kind of virtuous circle of improvement, right? Continuous improvement, because every school will compete for quality. So, but the entire idea of this market in education is based on the idea that parents will look for high quality schools. This is the basic. And surprisingly, as Marcela said, we have 35 years of market in education in Chile, and nobody was researching parents' point of view. As you mentioned, maybe parents don't want the public schools in their neighborhood, so they search for an alternative. They have the money, they have the resources to go to a private schools or not, and how do they solve this issue? We will share you some of the parents' discourse, because Marcela explained, this is a qualitative research, it's a massive qualitative research. 200 participants is a very large qualitative research. So we wanted to share with you some of the talks, the discourse. For example, when we analyze what is quality from the parents' point of view, it's very clear that they are not educational experts. So they cannot compare the pedagogy, the curriculum, the educational approach of the school. So the academic side of the quality dimension is very low in the discourse of the parents. It's very absent. But they are looking for more evident, more clear indicators of quality. For example, school infrastructure. The private subsidized schools have a much more beautiful presentation on their site. They will swear colored uniforms. They teach you not only the school building but the students. So they use teachers, the typical pants, so they differentiate them. The gray for the boys, the blue for the girls. But if you look the school building, the presentation of the school buildings looks more beautiful. What is implicit here is that she is comparing this private school with the public school, in which you don't have uniforms, you don't have this distinction, this kind of formal distinction. It's typical that in the public school they paint the fence in a phosphorescent color, nothing to do with the color of the structures. It's kind of real weird aesthetic. So in the conversation, she shared with us the typical kitchen table conversation, and also the friendly conversation. They always talk about the bathrooms. Why is that in public schools there are always problems with the bathrooms? So parents are looking for quality, but quality here is a very clear. They realize there's a clear distinction between public and private schools. There are some beautiful schools and some ugly schools. But then they move to a more, as I say, a more complex set of characteristics. It's important to know that your daughter is well cared for, that she is young. She was talking about, I think it was primary, first grade in primary, but she was 7-year-old. So she will not be in danger. An adult will care, a responsible adult will care. So she's implying that there are some schools in which the students are in danger. No, there is no adult caring for a professional adult caring for the safety of the students. Looks, it's a tiny school, has few students, so small class size. Here in the USA you have a very, very, very long debate about the class size. Parents in Chile also are looking for class size. It's very interesting. She said, I prefer the private schools because it's small. But, in Chile, the class size within the public sector is smaller than the private sector. But in the discourse of parents, they are always talking about the massive, the large number of students in the public school classroom. And this is not true for them. But it's a kind of discourse. It's the stigma, the social idea of public schools. So one looks for a school that is structured with rules, discipline, with all that for the children, because today there are many children who get lost. And I think if you look carefully at this last idea, I think she was a new middle class mother. She's moving slowly from the infrastructure, the school discipline, the characteristic of the supply, to the parents' characteristic, the students' characteristic, because many children can be lost. What kind of children? Well, the children in which in the families, they don't provide the socialization to not be lost, to be disciplined, and to behave in the way schools are expected to behave. So quality of education is a very complex issue, combining supply and demand side. And we will talk about that in more details later, because this issue, the very idea that the demand side is also part of the supply side. So the definition of quality include the characteristic of the peers is key to understand the dynamic that the school market have, not only in Chile, but also in any country in which some of the market dynamic has been created. So that's quality.
So let's move now to the payment. Why pay for your children's education? And the same as quality, we have identified here like different readings assigned to the idea of paying, not the idea. I mean, actually, there is a fact of paying for your children's education. Firstly, when you pay, you get access to a certain quality type of schools, So when I pay, I can get access to, for instance, as Christian say, highlight like particular infrastructure or particular way of teaching. So we have a certain quality of school, and parents build that. So as you say, as you see here in the first quote, so schools are like this. If you pay more, the quality of the people is better. Here we are talking about the social characteristic, but it's about different types of quality. The second quote, the economic factor, the price, tells you how good a school is. So we talk about the quality of the schools, but let me also tell you that we talk about the quality of the school, but also payment has a moral reading. So it's the quality of the school, but also the the quality of parents. If I pay more, I consider myself a better parent. I can afford and also, there's a kind of a moral reading about the payment. We talk about the academic reading in a way, or the reading of the infrastructure, but also about me. The payment speaks of me and my possibilities. Here in the quote, a mother said, I don't want to discriminate, but I think that the requirements of money is also important because this discriminates against a certain kind of people. So it speaks of me, but also it speaks about kind of the self-selection, If I pay a certain amount of money, my children will be able to attend a particular school with a certain type of people. We can think obviously of social class, but also we can think of educational background, ethnicity, different characteristics. But this is presented in this certain type of people. So we have payment that is looking for certain quality of schools or teaching provision, also about material characteristics of the schools, also about the families in the schools. But
let me add something, Marcela. The last sentence, if you see the final of the last sentence, is implying something that you have to know. In Chile, voucher schools can, as Marcela explained, add a little fee, so it's a co-payment system, and you have a differentiation, a price differentiation in the market. And some economists and politicians were saying, well, most of the schools charge a very little amount, so it's not so relevant, it's not discriminatory. So you have to pay $5, it's not too much. But she is very clear. If you pay, she said, the fact that it's a little bit of money, just $5, $10, excludes a huge amount of people. So the symbolic, as Marcela was explaining, the symbolic effect of charging even a little bit of money is a kind of self-selection for parents. She is implying everybody could pay that, but not everybody wanted to pay that.
And you can expand on that and say, okay, so we have a kind of micro markets, like different type of family, different type of payments, different type of schools. And I am part of the $5 type of schools, So, and I allocate myself, and I am different from the ones who pay $10, but I pay more than the others who pay, I don't know, $1.
A free school.
Yes. So this is a kind of part of the. But also, when we talk about money, we talk about here we are moving to more the consumer logic. Because I pay, I can claim things, And so also mothers and fathers say, well, because I pay, for instance, I expect that my children will receive a particular kind of teaching or a particular school experience. So they have how many playgrounds do my school have? So payment is the same as a school quality. Through payment, you can identify different readings, different signs regarding these school markets. And you can also identify, families read and behave in a way this kind of consumer logic and the consumer rational, join with subjectivities around this rational. Yes, I think the last quote is about this consumer logic. And the first one, and I will finish with that, in the first one we have a father who said, okay, I want the best for my daughter, and today this school is the best I can give her. I have 4 jobs, but if tomorrow I get a different job and I can afford something better, I will do it. And I'm moving back here to the moral thing, So I am committed to do the best. I will do my best for her to get access to this better school experience.
Yeah, and actually, this creates a highly mobile consumer. Actually, Chile has one of the largest proportion of students switching schools during their student career. Last year, we have now a centralized admission system. About 40% of the applications last year were just people wanting to switch a school, not people without a school, but just switching the school, because they behave in a very, they are not, they are active choosers in the economic literature, they say that. Well, so at this point, I think it's clear to you that we are moving from a more technocratic idea of quality and a rational idea of chooser to a more sociocultural idea of quality and consumer. And this created in Chile a highly complex micro system of discrimination and school segregation. Even if you have a country, Chile is a highly unequal country. You have a small elite with extremely high income, but then the rest, the 90%, the last 90% is highly equal because the income distribution is more flat. So we have highly concentrated elite, and most of the Chilean families have middle and middle-low family income. So when we talk about school segregation in Chile, and actually we have the highest school segregation in among all OECD countries, we conducted that research also. We are not just talking about the extremely highly elite segregation of elite people, but also the within middle and low social class families because of these micro detailed dynamics. When you read the academic literature about education, economists and sociologists and some psychologists and educators we have been debated for a very long time about peer effects. Have you listened to this concept, peer effect? Are peer effects relevant in education? Peer effect is the idea that the person who is with you in the classroom, in the school, also affect your learning process. So some people say, no, peer effect is not so relevant, others say, oh, it's maybe the most relevant. I have to tell you, for Chilean parents in the educational markets, they think that peer effect is actually the most relevant factor in the educational experience of the children. So peer effect is behind here. Everybody is looking for the peer effect. But there is another debate about peer effect in the literature, whether peer effects are positive or negative. Of course, everybody will agree that there are some positive effects. You learn from your peer. You do a homework with him, you study with him or her, so you learn from your peers. It's a positive effect. But also, there is a potential negative effect. If one of your peers is making noise in the classroom and is behaving badly, so maybe the teacher cannot conduct the class, so there is also a negative effect. Or maybe you share with him or her negative experiences, like drugs, alcohol, and all of these very, very bad things. So, what is more relevant, the positive or the negative side? I want to tell you that in the Chilean families, it's totally clear that it's more relevant the potential negative effect of peer effect is more relevant than the potential positive effect. So they are not just not so much searching for the best school socio-economic composition, kind of you could say aspirational middle class trying to share experience with the high social class. This is not the situation. The most common situation is middle class looking down to the low social class and trying to avoid the social class. They are not just trying to go up, but they are clearly avoiding going down. So because they think that the most relevant thing here is avoiding the negative peer effects. So a parent who can pay the incorporation fee, a national fee, not just the tuition, but the incorporation fee, does not give you security. No. There are problems in every school. There are some problems. It's not a total security, but marks you. There is a marks. If you pay something, you have a label. You can be a little bit more confident that this parent is a trustworthy trusted parent. Pay something, anything, so that your children are not with those who do not pay, the dangerous ones, the ones that take drugs, etc. So the idea here is avoiding the bad people and the payment and all. But if you have no money, you were explaining, you have to go to the school close to your house, and you live in a marginalized area in a metropolitan city like Santiago. You are very, very nervous about the school composition and the climate of the school. But if you don't have money, what do you have? The possibility to travel. So I don't want my children going to the neighborhood school, but I want to send my children to the schools in the city centers. And actually in Chile, in a city like Santiago, most of the daily travels, the commutation are related to school choice, because parents are trying to move. Everybody living in a marginalized area want the children going to a school in a different part of the city. So here I want to emphasize the idea that this process creates a very anxious user. You are not comfortable. You are nervous. You are anxious. Stress, a highly stressful process. Well, the first one is the idea that they don't want to go up, but they are avoiding to go down. So I saw similar people, hardworking people, nothing abnormal. You always search for the average, or a little bit higher. I think this is the most rigorous definition. It's similar to me, or a little bit higher, not too much higher, because I don't belong to this place, but certainly not lower than me. Anyway, so when you have this kind of dynamics, going back to the idea of supply and demand side, the demand, this is clearly the reference of the demand side. So what do you do as a supply side, as a school? Well, you realize that people are looking for this. So the social segregation of the school is not just an outcome. As I told you, we have a highly segregated school system, but it became a kind of part of the production function of the system. So you as a school start offering, if you are in a good position, start offering your parents, your students as a kind of part of the educational project you're offering. We are a school, a safe school with good children, good parents. So the social segregation here is not a problem. It's a positive value for some schools, and became part of the kind of what we call a market for school segregation now, not just for school quality, but for school segregation.
So quite related to this idea of the segregation is a value, has to do, one of the ways you segregate and generate like equal or homogeneous communities is through selection procedures. So we have here in this book, like we have identified again a conversation around selection procedures where parents from different social classes face a really tough process. We are basically talking about interviews with parents. We are talking about tests applied to children of 4 or 5 years of
3 years old.
Yes. Even starting at 3 years old, they are going through different kind of tests to test your math abilities, your social abilities, also draw numbers.
If you are able to do like this,
yes.
I'm serious.
Like different kind of selection procedures related with the school profile. And parents are aware of this, and the interesting, the qualitatively interesting thing, if I can put it like that, is that they go through this tough process. They realize that it's a tough process, but at the end, if at the end of that process I am successful, I was selected by the school, my children surpassed all these tests, I feel proud of myself. So it's a kind of a mixture between this suffering path, but at the same time, if I manage to get success, I feel really proud. And in this book, you will find these testimonies around the hard part and the good part of the selection. So, and also, even, in Chile also we choose and we pay to be chosen. We go through this tough process and we pay for that. And let me also highlight that we are talking not just about aspirational middle class parents. We are talking about elite parents, professional, successful professional parents that are happy, that are committed to a selection procedure that is characterized by interviews and tests for their children. And also we have seen in Chile a kind of a business around preschool acceptance training. You will find parents with children attending this school preparation for them to be successful. So, and the last idea here regarding selection, so I recognize that it's a tough process, but I value and I want, and in a way I value the power of selection, the school selection power, so it's complex, but I think it's a kind of, again, as a consumer, it will give me better quality, better possibilities if I get access to this selective school. So, and parents are not naive, as I said, regarding this logic. So, they are quite clear. So, practically in Chilean education, it is not that we choose as parents. In the end, it is the school that chooses you. And here we have a quote from a professional mother that realized that she has to go through this interview with the head teacher, and she finds herself basically trying to explain her mothering characteristics and felt kind of, as you say, anxiety, because shall I present myself like kind of empowered woman, blah, 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 or shall I present myself like quite relaxed mother? To be honest, I don't know, and at some point I feel like the head teacher knows much more of my son or my daughter than me, so it's a kind of, like a job interview in a way. But we are talking about upper class families, people who, in a way, here we have another quote, an example for new middle class families. A father who prepared his son. So we go through geometric figures, we talk about numbers, we review the colors. And when his son, after the exam day, he started to ask him, okay, how was the exam? It was fine. Well, they asked me about the numbers. Oh, great, and what numbers? What do you say? What numbers have you identified? And the boy missed one number 6. And this is kind of, oh my God, we're going to miss the place because you forgot to say number 6. And this is as that. We are not exaggerating things. So, because they were prepared for that test. And this last quote is again upper class families, and this mother is talking about, okay, we managed to get access to the religious Catholic school. She's not religious at all, but she said, okay, I start to attending my parental meetings, and I realize that for them it's important for me to pray. Okay, let's go and pray. I don't care if that makes me allow us to be part of this community. Okay, let's pray. So very practical, pragmatic approach, So we can see, that is why we talk about, I want to be selected in ways. I want to be part of this community. And here, once I have reviewed these selection procedures, I have mainly talked about admission process in a way. But we have another layer of selection. Maybe we can talk about the kind of shadow selection that goes through the experiences faced by parents who has children with special education needs, who has children affected by attention deficit disorder, and start to feel expelled from the system because their children are problematic, because it's a school that need to show good results. They need kind of an average student, and your son, your daughter is going to be problematic, and they start to feeling that they are expelled from this classroom. They are problematic. They problematize the special education needs of their children. And you have families that recognize, well, they made me send my daughter to the neurologist because they found her very distracting. We are talking about, again, 6, 7, 8 years old. At the school, they told me, you cannot leave him here because he's very hectic. So he's on, but the father said, but he's on pills with psychologists, neurologists. I'm doing everything. But here is the thing, and in the last quote, you have, this is a very interesting quote because a mother or a father recognize the complexity of, but situates him or herself in a way that she understands that this school behavior regarding like the problematization of the attention deficit disorder. But she said, okay, but what a school can do, because they are quite, right, they need to reach a certain academic level. So in a way I understand. And at the same time, I feel really pressured because I have these problematic children. And this mixture between, understanding and situating yourself not as someone who has the right, or your children who has the right to access to education, but probably what maybe school needs to do that, and I am the problem in a way, which is a kind of the idea, one of the key messages or feelings about the Chilean system, that it's about you. You need to solve this. If your children is problematic, okay, it's up to you in a way.
Well, actually, we are summarizing here the books, many other issues related to this. But I think you when you analyze all of these different dimensions about the real market, the real educational market, not the theoretical market, it became very clear that we are creating here something which is like the opposite model of public education. The idea of public education. Public education was supposed to be free for all, non-discriminatory, and a space, as Horace Mann said in the middle of 19th century here in this country, it was for the common good. So we need an institution for the common good. So we have to have an institution in which no matter who your parents are and the money they have, you have an equal opportunity for developing yourself. But also, as John Dewey says here, again, I'm quoting American thinkers, you also need an institution for democracy. And democracy is heterogeneous. So you have to have an institution in which everybody experiences something that is broader than your family. Your family is part of the problem here. It's a bias. Your family, of course, have all the right for raising you and socializing you. That's fine. But also, you need something more. You need a community. You need a society. And education was supposed to prepare you for that society. So public education, it was supposed to be free, open, diverse. So you go as a citizen looking for a right that is not parents' right. It's a children's right in today's language. They didn't use that language. In today's language, we say, well, this is children's right. It's exactly the opposite as this kind of consumer logic in the market that we were describing. And actually, that's true in the institutional side of the developing of the Chilean educational system. As you said, you can see in this graph, when the system started in 1980, about 80%, even more than 80% of the students attended public schools. In today's system, a little bit more than 30% of the students go to public schools. So if you see the institutional evolution of the Chilean education, it's very clear that if you create a market, public education is not the kind of institution that will be more successful. And as I said at the beginning, this is so clear that even if the reality goes against the concept, against the stigma, it's still there. The idea is still there. So, for example, I conducted a lot of research, myself and other economists and sociologists in Chile, and we have demonstrated many times that private voucher schools are not more effective in the academic dimension than public schools. And actually, most of them are even less effective than public schools, if you look just the academic dimension. But people still think that private schools, voucher private schools, we're talking about low-fee private schools, not any private schools, are more effective, are better spread, because people look for a more complex construct of public education, of education. And finally, it was very surprised to me. I have talked a lot about education in Chile, but when a parent in our interview, in one of our interviews, said, "Oh, it's bad. It's a public school." it's kind of synonym. It's bad, it's public, it's public, it's bad, it's the same. We're talking about the bad schools, the public schools. And one party say, even if, no matter how good are the public schools, they are still bad. It's a kind of contradiction. Oh, well, there are some good public schools, but they are still public schools, so they are bad schools. What are you talking about? It's a kind of, but it's the new common sense. Public schools is bad because it's public, and because it's the kind of anti-model of this school. We want a school that is charging tuition, we want to pay, is selective, we don't want everybody going there, is homogeneous, we don't want diversity, so etc. It's a kind of anti-model, and I think this, when you see Chile as a kind of radical laboratory of neoliberal thinking and policies, it's very clear at the end of the story. Of course, here in the USA, you also have a lot of market dynamics in education. And in some Europe countries, Australia also, New Zealand, Sweden, Belgium, Netherlands, England, everybody is trying, is attempting to introduce some of the market instrument, not the radical neoliberal reform, but I think we can tell you the end of the story. If you create a market in education, an unregulated market, you create a highly segregated school, kind of opposite to the idea of traditional public school.
And well, to finish the presentation, so we have a kind of a question. We have exploring now the subjectivities of this model. So is there a new neoliberal common sense around education, around the right to education? And we bring here a quote from Katia Araujo's book. She's a Peruvian researcher who has a huge research regarding Chilean neoliberalism. And she tried to understand, well, what happened in this laboratory, in terms of access, rights, and social services. What are the familiar reflections, experiences? And so she highlighted, and in a way we try to make some connections with this idea that Chileans have developed a strong sense of feeling overwhelmed, the process of selection, the process of payment. I have 4 jobs, but I can have another one. So they are overwhelmed by different kind of demands.
Marcela, sorry, and she's talking about not just education, also
yes.
in the housing market, the health market, the social security market. Please.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, no, it's fine. So one of the characteristics of this neoliberal laboratory is like the different services organized as a market. So Chileans have developed a strong sense of feeling overwhelmed, but they have also developed greater confidence in their abilities and capacities to face the challenge of social life. So when we talk about selection, remember when we talk about we have to go through this process, but at the end, if I manage to be successful, I will feel proud of myself. So this kind of mix, very simplified, but these sentiments around I can do it, but it's very, very tough. And it's about me or we as a family. And one good example of this kind of contradictory dynamic or this common sense has to do with the meritocracy. I mean, generally, from a liberal perspective, when we talk about meritocracy, we talk about the idea of if I have a common field, and I provide the space for equal opportunities, it's about your effort, Then you get access to opportunities, but I need to guarantee this common field. In the case of the model we have reviewed, these opportunities, this level field, however, bring families into the competition in a way. So you, in a way, create a bias in this because you bring social capital, you bring cultural capital, so it's not this plain field. So in a way, meritocracy, by including this family effort, you start to rereading the idea of effort. You start to rereading the idea of equal opportunities. So this is a kind of example of how this common sense is reshaped within this market law. I don't know if you want to expand.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I think we have time to talk.
Okay, thank you so much. We have time for a few questions. And yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. That's really interesting. My question is about the new constitution in Chile. I was wondering, the one which was already voted down, wondering whether there's any mention, or whether with the new Boric government, maybe anything has changed, or you guys are a bit depressed and things aren't really going to change.
You can start.
Oh, you please.
Okay, so the university, well, we have experience in the last, I would say, 20 years. This system has changed. in terms of education policy. Let me go before the constitutional thing. So this system, this school marketized system there are reforms introduced to try to bring kind of inclusion, diversity, so you try to bring in some reforms to provide more justice in a way. And the idea of when we arrived to the constitutional reform process, the idea was to create, and to develop a right-based approach to education. As all of you are aware, so this has kind of this movement, this idea of bringing a more right-based approach was crucially intersected by different kind of issues like the COVID pandemic and the conversation around the more right-based approach to education was, I would say, crucially interrupted. If you ask me if I have a kind of a positive or negative perspective, I think the discussions around education in Chile are quite ideological in a way. I think today, still the idea of private education as a better space, the idea of selection as something that you value, all these kind of values we have reviewed today, I think they are quite present. So it's not a simple answer for your question. And I don't think it's to be optimistic, it's to be, for instance, talk about, we could talk about enhance the public system, but also we need to acknowledge that people value private education systems. So we need to understand this complexity, these mixed feelings. I don't know if
I want to add that we as a human beings, as a social aliens, we are contradictory. So maybe the same family that is asking for a better school, and maybe they were saying free public education, they are sending their children to private schools, and they are looking for the best way, because there is a contradiction here. And in our interviews, many times people at the end of the interview were saying, "No, well, if it were a good public education, non-discriminatory education, free good education, oh wow, I read that in Europe is like this. That would be great. I will support that. But in Chile, impossible." So if you have this kind of contradiction, it's very difficult for a kind of political process to support the idea of social rights as a common experience.
Can I ask a question from the chat? So Matias Montero Salazar thanks you for this insightful presentation. Oh, and he's just sending kind regards to Professor Christian and Marcela. It's not a question. Sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't read it first. But more questions, please. Yeah.
With 40 years of data, are there any generational shifts that you've seen? Parents now being, every 30 years, new set of parents are coming in and different ideologies, especially from a security perspective. Has there been a big shift there?
Well, actually, as we explained, the research on parents' view on school choice is very scarce before this way of studies. We have a couple of studies one study in the 80s and one study in the 90s that I can identify. Actually, it was an American doctoral student at the beginning of the 90s. And I would say that based on that, I can say that the security issue, the idea of security, is kind of new idea. It's more recent. And actually, to complement your question, today the issue of delinquency and security is the big issue, and nobody is caring about the new constitution. Everybody wants to solve the immigrant issue and the delinquency issue, the drugs issue, and we are not talking about. So the security issue is increasingly relevant in the school choice. But I would say that the social class issue, the stigma on public education, was rapidly created. In some surveys of Barun Gauri, this is the name of the doctoral student, now an academic, he identified this idea. But it was not totally clear. People in Chile, like him in the academy, were in a kind of basic debate about whether parents look for quality or quality in the academic sense, or social class. And this was the debate. It was just a kind of ideological debate. And a survey before our book, a survey, showed a very interesting survey. Gregory Lacqua, another researcher, he asked parents about the school. Oh, you have your child in this school, I don't know, the Orange School. What is the test score, the SIMSE test score, the academic achievement of your school? Some parents say something, no, don't know, it's a number, 250. What is the social composition of your school? And the parents have to identify the social composition of the school. So, at the end of the day, Chilean parents were very precise in identifying the social composition of the school, but very vague. They didn't know about the school academy. So they were more clear about the social composition of the academy. So I would say that the socio-cultural issues were present from the beginning.
Maybe I would add on top of that I think one of the interesting things, or that keep evolving, if you talk about middle class and new middle class, I think one of the things that is that also you will see, and you will increasingly see, new kind of consumers, new markets, new things that are with us interesting, or values around education. It's a changing consumer. It's a changing process, because it's also informed and shaped by the discussion around rights in education. I mean, people are part of the community who are discussing, because Chile in the last 10 years has changed a lot and has new conversations are brought into the table in terms of ethnicity, in terms of rights and Mapuches. I mean, a lot of things are happening there in migration. So you have also new type of conversations, fears, which are manifested also in identities across middle classes. So at least I think I have a lot of curiosity about continue researching new middle classes in Chile. I think it's quite of a reach.
Can I use my role as moderator to follow up on this question of the Mapuche and the ethnicity? So I wonder, you didn't talk at all during the presentation on whether this is about social class or there's a racial component and skin tone effect on who you see as the people you don't. The parents are saying, I don't want them to be with them, the other, whether the other is also in some ways ethnicized or racialized. So I was wondering about that as you were talking, and since you mentioned the Mapuche and the right now, I would want to know.
Yeah, I have to say that the ethnic side of this has not been an open conversation in Chile. So that was also part of the conflict with the new constitution. And I have to say that it's embedded, it's a hidden side of our conversation, but explicitly nobody in our research was talking about the Mapuches or the Indians, the native people. But some researchers say, well, we are highly discriminatory society and racialized society. But it's not part of the explicit conversation. The image we created, we didn't talk a lot about this in the book, but it's also in the book. It's not like here the issue of race or black students and Black Lives Matter and all the debate about race. In Chile, they identify the flight. Flight is like, how do you explain that? It's kind of the very marginalized person, but that is proud of being marginalized. So it's kind of aggressive. It's marginalized, but it's aggressive. So if you want to talk about someone that's really the bad thing, the bad guy that you find only in public schools and free public, is the flight. This kind of people. So it's not. But some anthropologists were also working. We have a student doing his master thesis, and he linked the idea of flight with all of this traditional idea of the evil in Chile, including the Indian, the Mapuches. But it's not explicit. You need some kind of psychoanalytic techniques to go there, I think.
Let me squeeze in a question that is coming from the chat because we will finish that part of the broadcast in a second. So this is Francisca Alvarez Figueroa who's asking, thanks for this fantastic presentation. In light of the creation of the new form of public school districts in Chile and local services of public education, do you think that the image of school education has been worsened because of veiling some of the conditions of these schools? Or this new policy hasn't impacted the perspective of families towards public education? So I think it's a question also about how the school looks, no?
On the sign, I think you can talk about the sign because they are asking about the sign.
Marcela explained. We have implemented recently a couple of reforms. She's talking about the new public education, which is a policy that is taking the administration of the school from the municipality to a new kind of local educational agency that is expected to have more quality in the management process, more professional management. And to be rigorous with the question, we don't have research on this issue, or whether this change will have been changing the social perception of the public school. So I would say we don't know. But the other reform that was linked to this reform, to what Marcela was referring to, was the inclusion law. And the inclusion law tried to address some of these issues we were talking about, the discrimination during the school admission process, the fee, the co-payments, or the President Bachelet, Michelle Bachelet, was trying to increase the number of free schools, even voucher schools. So, she created a new school admission system, a centralized school admission system that is heavily based on random assignment. And when we were conducting the study, this reform was being debated in the Congress. So many of our parents were explaining us not just the traditional view, but also their position to this reform. And that's why I explained you, some of them finished the interview, saying, well, maybe President Bachelet is right with the idea. Maybe that's good for some European countries. We are not that. So in these countries, it's very difficult to have this inclusion law as a new common, as a new institutional design.
So I will have to stop the broadcast section of our conversation, but we will continue here in our seminar room. I want to thank again Dr. Marcela Ramos and Christian Belay for sharing their expertise with us today. And I want to point out to our audience that on Thursday, not Friday, but Thursday, May 18th is our next seminar. It will be at 4 p.m. Pacific time with our Latin American Perspectives lecturer, Don Marie Paley, who will talk about Mexico's military transformation.